I will answer those questions during my presentation. Firstly, so my name is Oliver Löfman Nastefski, and the title of my thesis is Offshoring of Construction Engineering Services, Top Strategy, Work Processes and Challenges. And I have done this with a two-way case study perspective between Sweden, India and Romania. The following is the structure of my presentation, starting with a background to the topic, then the method and case study used. Thereafter, I will go briefly through some of my theoretical framework, my findings and analysis, and finally a conclusion and some recommendations. So on this picture you see a map of Gothenburg and all the construction projects planned for the next 30 years or so. And the goal is to create 25,000 new apartments and 45,000 new workplaces in the shape of offices and other buildings. So there's a whole lot going on in the industry. And this article was posted in the Gothenburg newspaper in the late 2016, saying that we will have a deficit of 100,000 workers or professionals within the industry. And this was concluded by researchers at Chalmers, and it encompasses all stages, everything from carpenters to site managers to engineers and architects. This is another report claiming that the recruitment need within the industry is on a record high level. So to answer the question I posed earlier, do we have enough professionals? No, we don't. A big no. So one of the suggestions by the researcher at Chalmers on how to attack this challenge was to utilize competence and qualified staff from abroad, from other countries. And I'm sure you have already seen that we have a lot of workers from Poland, from Czech Republic, Latvia, Balkan, working on our construction sites. But this also applies to the engineering services, which has been the focus of my thesis. So what offshoring means is that a company buys products or services from the same company being located in another country. So in my case, the office in Gothenburg are buying engineering services from India and Romania, but they all belong to the same company. And when you engage in these collaborations, you will have so-called global virtual teams, meaning that the engineers only communicate via technology. And since they are located in other different countries, they do not have the possibility for physical meetings, which imposes several challenges. Based on this, my goal was to investigate how a large company works with offshoring in the context of why is it chosen as a strategy, what are the different work processes, and what are the challenges in the global virtual teams, which was then resulting in these three questions. Like I said, first, why are companies using offshoring as a strategy? And what are the identified challenges? And secondly, how does this take place in my company, in the case study? And lastly, to come up with some practical recommendations. The study has been a qualitative one using an abductive strategy, starting with a literature review, mainly within the fields of operations, knowledge, and international management, mostly on Google Scholar and Chalmers Electronic Library. Having done that, I performed 11 semi-structured interviews with managers and engineers from Sweden, India, and Romania. The ones with the Swedes were conducted face-to-face, while the others were performed with video calls on the computer. All the persons represent the same company, which is one of the largest in the world if you look on consultants within the construction industry. And the office in Gothenburg have worked with offshoring for around 5 years, and Romania as well. But if you look on India, they have worked for decades, 20, 30 years with the US, the UK, Middle East, and Australia. So having done that, I had a lot of data to analyze, which resulted in a conclusion and some practical recommendations. So as I said, offshoring has been used globally for decades in other businesses. But when we look on the construction industry in Sweden, it has not been used for many years. One of the first actors to use this was ÅF, which in 2011 had an offshoring element, which really surprised the industry because they won a large contract in Stockholm. And the reason why they could win was that they had engineers from Poland and Scotland, and therefore could reduce the cost significantly. With that in mind, nowadays all of the large consultants are working with offshoring. So why is offshoring used? Well, according to Hettonen and Eriksson, which are prominent within the field, there are three different motives or broad phases. The first one is to reduce the cost by offshoring to a country with lower wages, which has historically been the most important. Secondly, to seek resources and competence which is not available in Sweden, not in your home country, which is the case for Sweden. And the last one is more diffuse. It's about organizational transformation, meaning that you're active on a global market, you have flexible organizational forms. So what are the challenges for the engineers when they collaborate in these global virtual teams? Well, the literature tells us there are a lot. This one by Lee categorized the challenges in communication, culture, interpersonal, technology, and economy challenges. So my focus has been on communication and culture. So in regards to communication, what are the challenges? Well, I think the management consultant Peter Drucker put it quite well when he said, the most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. The language, the English proficiency, is a natural challenge if it's not your native language. To formulate yourself, to understand the context, and communicate advanced information is a challenge. Furthermore, which communication mediums are you going to use? You're separated both in space and sometimes even in time. Are you going to have mails, phone calls, like in domestic projects? Are you going to have video calls as well? Also, is communication only words? Well, of course it's not. According to Ferma, words only correspond to 7% of communication, whilst body language and tone and inflections, the way you use your voice, correspond to 55 and 38%. So when you sit in different countries, then you will eliminate much of these non-verbal signals. So that is, of course, a large challenge. Cultural background also influences the collaborations to a certain extent. Hofstede is well known within the field, and he developed this so-called cultural dimension theory, which consists of 6 different dimensions. So by using these dimensions, you can quite accurately categorize different countries and then use it as a tool for managing them. So for example, you can be either low power or high power. Low power is an organization which is very flat, whilst high power have more distributed roles and hierarchies. And to take some examples, Sweden, Nordic countries, we are familiar with flat organization, whilst countries with more hierarchies are, for example, India, China, and the Philippines. Coming to the findings and analysis of my interviews. First of all, why does the company use offshoring as a strategy? Well, it turns out that they primarily do it to seek staff which cannot be found in Sweden. It's a construction boom, as mentioned by everyone else before. And as one top manager put it, it has rather been more difficult to find qualified staff than projects lately. Cost savings was seen as a bonus, a positive bonus, of course, but it was not the primary reason right now. Furthermore, it's a global company, so they want to utilize the knowledge available in the different offices worldwide. And lastly, to prepare for the future. Bad times or recessions, they are going to strike eventually. And then it might be very advantageous to have this element where you can reduce costs by offshoring work to Romania and India in this case. So why did they choose India and Romania? Well, there are many good alternatives. India is very popular worldwide. China is called the factory of the world, and India is often called the back office of the world. And this is to several reasons. Firstly, they have a huge talent pool of qualified engineers. Secondly, the low wage level is relatively low. And thirdly, they have a very high English proficiency. And to answer the question I said in the beginning, India graduates 900,000 engineers every year, Bachelor of Engineering. Sweden, less than 10,000. And of course, India will be the most populous country in the world in some years, but the competition is still high, and many Indians want to get these international experiences. Romania is also a country where the wage level is quite low, but they still have high education. It should also be said that the tasks which the company offshore to India, they are quite routinized, standardized, can be CAD drawings and beam maintenance, while Romania is more equivalent to Sweden, doing calculations and drawings as well. When it comes to the work process, they said that it was similar to the ones you perform in the domestic project. However, there are extra steps, translation, have to do additional quality checks. But to facilitate this, the Swedes have developed a lot of templates, a lot of checklists, detail libraries, which the Romanian and Indian engineers can use to understand the Swedish client requirements. But it should also be said that the work process differs between the different projects and people in charge. The Romanian and Indian engineers often stress that it was quite frustrating because it implies a learning curve on every new project. These are the most frequently mentioned challenges. First of all, the language barrier, speaking in English and writing in English. Interpretation of contexts was also mentioned. In culture, there are differences in work-life philosophies. And maybe the most mentioned was that the Indian and Romanian engineers had troubles understanding the Swedish client, because the Indians, example, they are used with US and UK standards, while Sweden have their own building codes, etc. Furthermore, under technology, you are limited to the screen. You cannot go into the office of your colleague and do some draws and sketches. You are limited to a flat surface. Regards to communication, well, it was said that the English proficiency was on an adequate level in most cases. However, especially the Indian engineers stressed that the English proficiency among older Swedish engineers was on a too low level, which implied several challenges during the projects. The usage of video calls was surprisingly non-existing. Many of them stressed that, well, it feels like I work with a robot, I cannot understand what it means. We speak on the phone sometimes. And then I said, why don't you just have a simple video call to get these non-verbal signals? And then there wasn't any good answer to that. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, the project management from the Swedish side was stressed as too low. The planning, the communication of changes, the team building aspect, feedback, the Indians and Romanians expect more. Culture has an influence. This is based on a very small sample, so it's not supposed to be representative. However, it gives some interesting hints. As you can see, the answers differ a bit between the countries. For example, on the last one, there was one Swede saying, yeah, we are very flexible, we are innovative, we take risks. Whilst the other said, no, we are very conservative, we don't want to take any risks. Furthermore, you can see here, low power, Sweden and Romania, they consider themselves to have a quite flat organization, whilst India still have more hierarchies and distributed roles. So I think this is a very important tool to have. Coming to the conclusion, well, in regards to the strategy, the company aligns much with the research being done within the field. They have this cost reduction element, but the most important is to seek resources. Language, like I said, the English proficiency is a natural challenge, especially among older engineers in Sweden. The difference in cultural background didn't, in this case, seem to have a significant impact. And I think this has to do with the fact that all of them represent a global company, which is quite prestige and well known. So I felt like they left the cultural aspects at home, being more professional at work. As I also stressed before, the project management was seen as too low from the Swedish side. I was a bit ahead of time now, so I should say something more before I...
We have more time for questions.
Yeah. Well, I come to my practical recommendations, which I can put some more time on. Firstly, educate Swedish engineers in project management. A parallel could be that the architects in Sweden are very much into art design. They don't do any engineering, whilst in the rest of the world, the architects are also engineers. And I think there would take not too much to make this same thing for the engineers. You cannot just be good at drawing details and calculations. You have to do some project management, at least if you engage in offshoring collaborations. Secondly, inspire and coach senior engineers that struggle with the language and are not familiar with working with people from across the globe. Our generation will gradually take over, of course, but at the time we need to focus on them as well. Standardize these Swedish expectations. You cannot have different demands from each and every person, because then you would have the learning curves for these Romanian and Indian engineers all the time. 4, encourage video calls. My suggestion is that the company puts a requirement that you have a video conference, a video call in the beginning of each and every project to eliminate this feeling of working with a robot. That is not a big demand. Because now I felt that it was a silent agreement between all of them. No one wanted to take the initiative. But as I conducted the interviews via video calls, they appreciated it a lot. And of course you get another feeling of the person. You can see how does he react, is he twisting, rather than just writing an email. 5, set off time for compiling lessons learned. Well, time is always a constraint, but I think now in the early years it's very important to compile these lessons learned for each project. And lastly, spread the word in the organization. Get those skeptical people aware of why the top management sets this as an important strategy. Many people are afraid that it might impact their job or that it's very alien. So I think you need to involve persons and have lunch seminars, have workshops, whatever it takes. With that being said, if you want to know more about the topic, I suggest you read my report. And I thank you for your attention and welcome any questions.
Thank you. So we open up for questions then.